Montgomery lineage she'd uploaded from the public database. No connection to the family he so proudly paraded. In fact, the test showed something else entirely. Charles's genetic markers matched a different surname altogether. Holloway. When she told him that evening, he laughed, dismissing it as nonsense. Those tests aren't perfect, Eve. Some lab technician probably switched the samples. It happens all the time, but Evelyn wasn't the type to let doubt die quietly. She ordered another test. Then another, through different companies, each confirming the same result. The Montgomery bloodline, so revered in their home, was a lie. "Charles," she whispered one night, voice sharp as glass, "do you even know who you are?" His face turned pale. "What kind of question is that? The kind you answer when you're not a Montgomery." For days, the house simmered with silence. Charles avoided her eyes, moving through the mansion like a ghost, and Evelyn became consumed with piecing together the truth. She scoured birth records, compared genetic data, cross-referenced everything she could. The more she searched, the clearer the story became somewhere along the line. An illegitimate child had entered the Montgomery family tree. Charles's great-grandfather, born not of nobility, but of scandal. Evelyn's fascination transformed into something venomous. She began to see every gesture, every word Charles had ever said about his heritage, as fraud. "You built everything on a lie," she told him one night as rain battered the windows. Stat. "The reputation, the business, none of it's yours." He slammed his fist on the table. "Don't you dare say that." "My family, your family," she interrupted, "isn't yours by blood. You don't even belong to them." After that, things unraveled quickly. Invitations to galas were declined. Business partners whispered. His mother, frail and proud, refused to speak to either of them after Evelyn shared her findings for transparency. Charles's inheritance, nearly $10 million in assets and trust funds tied to the Montgomery estate, was frozen under scrutiny. The lawyers called it an unprecedented genealogical dispute. Evelyn called it justice. But late at night, when she couldn't sleep, guilt began to claw at her. She would replay their early years, their laughter, their shared dreams, the way Charles used to look at her, as if she were his anchor in a world of pretense. Had she destroyed him for the sake of truth, or had she liberated him from a false life? One evening, she found him sitting in the dark study, staring at the sword above the mantel. The faint light from the fireplace glinted off its blade. He didn't turn as she entered. "Do you remember what my grandfather said when we got married?" he murmured. "That I was the last true Montgomery." Evelyn hesitated. "Yes." He looked over his shoulder then, eyes hollow. "Guess he was right. I was the last because you killed the rest." The words hit her harder than she expected. "Charles slowly. You wanted the truth, Evelyn. Well, here it is. You've turned it into a weapon. Congratulations." She tried to speak, but he brushed past her, leaving the scent of his cologne fading in his wake. That night, she heard the front door close softly, followed by the hum of his car engine fading down the long driveway. He didn't come home after that. Weeks later, a lawyer called. The Montgomery estate had been officially transferred away from Charles to a distant cousin whose bloodline was undisputed. Charles had left her a note, short and scrawled in familiar ink. "You can have the truth. I'll keep my dignity." Evelyn sat on the floor of the study, surrounded by the documents that had once thrilled her, and realized the truth had cost her everything: the marriage, the name, the illusion of love. But even then, she couldn't stop herself. Her fingers traced the old Montgomery crest, her eyes wet but hungry. There were still unanswered questions. Because somewhere in the shadows of history, she was certain the real story hadn't yet been told. The winter after Charles left was the coldest Evelyn could remember. The Montgomery estate, stripped of its grandeur and servants, became a museum of her own, making filled with relics that accused her with their silence. Dust collected on the mantel, where the sword once hung. Letters from lawyers lay unopened on the desk. The world outside had moved on. Schwernost. Every morning, she woke at dawn, her body remembering the rhythm of a life no longer Hursty at 6, ledger work at 7, the hum of household staff by 8. Now there was nothing but the faint ticking of the grandfather clock and the creak of old wood. Still, she dressed as if the house were full. Pearls. Pressed blouses, her hair swept up in the same elegant bun Charles used to compliment. The routine was armor, the only way to keep from collapsing under the weight of what she'd done. Then came the letter. It was postmarked from May no return address, only her name written in a familiar, deliberate hand. The paper was thick, the handwriting elegant. For a moment, her heart lifted. She tore it open, half afraid, half hopeful. But the words inside weren't from Charles. Mrs. Montgomery. You don't know me, but I know you've been searching for the truth about the Montgomery line. I believe I can help. Floor once years ago. There's a stone slab beneath it. We didn't have the tools back then, and my father didn't want to disturb the dead. But maybe it's time we did. Together they cleared away the debris. The floorboards creaked, giving way to a cold slab of stone embedded in the dirt. On its surface was a faint engraving, a crest Evelyn recognized instantly. The Montgomery insignia. Daniel knelt and traced the lines with his fingers. She said the truth was here. Do you want to see it? Evelyn hesitated, fear prickling the back of her neck. Yeah. He pulled a crowbar from his satchel, apparently prepared for this moment, and wedged it beneath the edge of the slab. It groaned, then lifted just enough to reveal a dark cavity below. A smell rose from it, earthy, metallic, ancient. Daniel grabbed a flashlight and shone it down. Inside was a wooden box, half decayed, bound with rusted iron clasps. He hauled it out and set it on the floor. Evelyn knelt beside him, her breath fogging in the cold air. Open it, she whispered. Daniel hesitated, then forced the lid open. Inside were bones, small, fragile. The skeleton of an infant wrapped in tattered cloth. Evelyn recoiled, pressing a hand to her mouth. Dear God, Daniel's expression was unreadable. She tried to protect him. But Charles must have found out. Next to the remains lay a locket, still intact despite the years. Evelyn picked it up with trembling fingers. Inside was a miniature portrait of Margaret, and beside her, a man who was unmistakably not Charles Montgomery. His name was engraved faintly beneath the image. Asterisk Edward Holloway. Asterisk, she wasn't just hiding her child, Evelyn whispered. She was hiding love. Daniel nodded slowly. And that love cost both families everything. For a long moment, neither spoke. The truth lay before them, quiet, damning, final. Evelyn realized that her quest for truth had never been about ancestry or bloodlines. It had always been about identity, about knowing where belonging began and where it ended. As she looked down at the bones, a chill ran through her. Do you think Charles ever knew this part of the story? She asked softly. Daniel shook his head. No, but I think he felt it. That's why he clung to the Montgomery name so fiercely. He was protecting a legacy that was never real. The wind outside began to howl through the broken windows, carrying with it the distant sound of church bells. Evelyn closed the locket gently and handed it to Daniel. What happens now? She asked. He met her gaze, his eyes solemn. Now, Mrs. Montgomery, we decide what to do with the truth. Whether to bury it again, or let it burn. But before she could answer, a loud crack echoed through the chapel. The doors swung open, slamming against the walls. A figure stood framed in the fog toll, motionless, familiar. Evelyn's heart stopped. Charles, she whispered. He stepped forward, his face pale but resolute, his voice low and trembling. I told you, Evelyn. Some truths were never meant to be found. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. For a heartbeat, she thought she was hallucinating, that the ghost of her guilt had conjured Charles out of the fog. But then, he stepped fully into the broken light streaming through the chapel roof, the hem of his coat damp with mist, his eyes colder than she remembered. Charles, she breathed, standing slowly. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same, he said, voice even but sharp as a blade. But I already know. You're still digging. He glanced past her at Daniel, then at the open chest and the bones on the floor. His expression didn't change, but something in his jaw twitched. So this is what it's come to. Desecrating graves to feed your obsession. It's not desecration, Evelyn said. It's truth. Charles laughed once, bitterly. Truth? You think you know truth. Evelyn, you think one woman's diary and a box of bones can rewrite history? Daniel took a step forward. It's not about rewriting. It's about setting it right. Charles turned on him, his eyes narrowing. And who are you to decide that? A Holloway, I presume. Daniel didn't flinch. Yes, my name is Daniel Holloway. Your blood might say the same thing, whether you like it or not. For a moment, no one spoke. The air seemed to tighten around them, thick with old hatred and something deeper, something inherited. Evelyn moved between them. Charles, listen to me. You need to see this for what it is. Your family didn't just falsify records, they committed a crime. That baby down there is none of your business, Charles snapped, his voice rising. For the first time. You've done enough damage already, Evelyn. You ruined my life once. You took everything from me. Now, you want to destroy the last thing I have left, my name. It was never your name, she said softly. His eyes darkened. Say that again. She hesitated but didn't back down. It was never your name, Charles. It was built on lies, on blood and silence. You were born into something false, and now her words were cut off by the sound of his hand, striking the side of the old altar. Wood splintered under his fist. He didn't look at her when he spoke again. You think I didn't know, he said quietly. You think I didn't feel it every time I looked in the mirror. My father, his father before, him none of us fit. We were ghosts wearing borrowed skin, but you had to prove it. You had to drag it into the light for everyone to see. Evelyn's voice trembled. I just wanted to understand. No, he said, stepping closer. You wanted control. You wanted to tear everything apart and remake it in your image. Even me. Daniel moved subtly, positioning himself between them. You need to calm down. Montgomery, don't call me that. Charles shouted, the word echoing off the stone walls. For a long moment, all three of them stood in silence, the fog swirling around the broken windows like restless spirits. Then, Charles's gaze drifted to the open box again, the remains, the locket, the journal, beside it. His expression softened, but not in peace. It was a hollow sort of grief. My grandfather told me once, he said quietly, that the Montgomery blood was cursed. I thought he meant pride, but now I see what he really meant. We were never meant to exist. Evelyn took a careful step forward. Charles, that's not true. You're not defined by their lies. You're still you. He looked at her, and for a fleeting second, she saw the man she'd married, the one who used to hum Sinatra while making coffee, who held her hand at charity galas, who once kissed her forehead as though she were something sacred. Then his gaze hardened again. Do you know what happened after you left? He asked. After you sent your precious DNA results to my mother, to the board, to the press, Evelyn swallowed. She died, Evelyn. 3 weeks later, a stroke, they said. But I know it was the shame. You didn't just destroy my inheritance, you killed the last of her piece. Evelyn's face went pale. Charles, I didn't. He cut her off with a raised hand. Save your apologies. I didn't come here for forgiveness. Daniel's hand went subtly to his coat pocket. Then what did you come here for? Charles smiled thinly. To end this. He reached into his own coat and pulled out a small revolver. Its metal stickle real. Evelyn gasped, stumbling Charles, no please, she said, her voice breaking. This isn't who you are, isn't it? He said quietly. Maybe it's exactly who I am. A man without a name, without a family, without a future. You made sure of that. Daniel raised his hand slowly. You don't want to do this. I understand your anger, but this won't fix anything. Charles's hand shook slightly, but he steadied it. You don't understand anything. Your family started this. You think you're some kind of hero. You're just another Holloway trying to take what's ours. Evelyn's mind raced. Charles, listen to me. Margaret tried to protect that child. She wasn't trying to destroy your family, she was trying to save both. He looked at her for a long moment. The fog settling around his shoulders like a shroud. And yet, here we are, he said softly. Then, almost absently, he turned the gun not toward them, but toward the open chest and the remains within. Evelyn screamed. No, the shot rang out, deafening in the small chapel. Dust cascaded from the rafters, and the echo of it seemed to hang in the air, forever. When Charles stood, trembling, the revolver hanging limply from his hand. Smoke curled upward like a ghostly thread. Daniel rushed forward, grabbing the weapon from him before he could react. What the hell are you doing? Charles stared at the shattered box. Erasing the past, he whispered. For good. Evelyn fell to her knees beside the ruined remains, tears streaming down her face. You can't erase it, she said through sobs. You can destroy the evidence, but the truth doesn't die. Charles. It lives in you. In me. In all of us. He sank against the altar, eyes hollow. Then, maybe it's time the truth had company. Before Daniel could stop him, Charles reached into his coat again, pulling something, small and old family ring, engraved with the Montgomery crest. He looked at it one last time, then threw it into the open cavity beneath the slab. Let it rot with them, he said. Andouille tat into the fog, leaving clutching the pieces of history she had fought so hard to uncover while realizing, perhaps too late, that some legacies are buried for a reason. Daniel stood beside her, silent. The wind whistled through the cracks in the chapel, carrying away the last echo of the gunshot. After a long moment, he said quietly, "He's not finished, you know, top. Erface pas." What's he door, you mean? Daniel's eyes were fixed on the door, where the fog had swallowed Charles whole. Because a man who's lost his name, he said, has nothing left to lose. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. She sat in the small inn by the harbour, staring out at the black, churning sea. The fog still hadn't lifted it, pressed against the windows like something alive, something that wanted to come inside. Every sound made her start, the creak of the floorboards, the faint whisper of the wind slipping through the cracks, the soft tap of waves against the dock below. Daniel had insisted on walking her back after the chaos in the chapel. He'd tried to speak, to offer some sort of comfort, but there was nothing left to say. They both knew that the truth they'd uncovered, wasn't he over it, had only begun to uncoil. Charles was out there somewhere, roaming the fog with nothing but a gun and the ghosts of his ancestors. Evelyn couldn't shake the image of him, his trembling hands. His hollow stare, the sound of that single shot still ringing in her ears. She kept seeing the baby's remains, too. Margaret's words in that journal, asterisk blood always tells. Asterisk at some point, exhaustion took her. But when she woke, the clock said 3:17 a.m. and someone was knocking on her door. A soft, deliberate knock. Her heart jumped. She sat up, clutching the blanket, straining to listen. Evelyn. The voice was faint, but familiar. Daniel. She hesitated before unlocking the door. He stood there, pale, breath clouding in the cold air. "You need to come with me," he said. "Now, what's wrong?" "It's Charles," he said. "He's back at the manor." Her stomach twisted. "How do you know?" "Because I saw him," Daniel said. "He was walking toward the cliffs behind the house. And he's not alone." Evelyn blinked. "Not alone." "Who?" "I don't know," he said, cutting her off. "But I think it's someone from the Montgomery estate. Maybe a lawyer. Maybe worse." The night outside was raw and bitter as they drove up the winding road toward the ridge. The fog was thicker than before, swallowing the headlights whole. The manor loomed ahead, black against the sky. Its windows dark except for one faint light glowing in the top floor of the old study. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "That's where his grandfather's portrait hangs," she whispered. They parked near the gate and climbed out. The grass was slick with dew, and every step crunched softly. "Stay behind me," Daniel murmured. They slipped through the broken door into the house. The air inside was damp and heavy with the smell of mold. Somewhere above them, a floorboard creaked. Evelyn whispered, "He's upstairs." They moved slowly, each step deliberate. The grand staircase groaned under their weight, and when they reached the landing, they could hear voices, two men, low and urgent. "You can't just walk away from this, Charles," one said. "There's still time to fix it. If you retract the claims she made, if you discredit her, the Montgomery trust can be reinstated." Charles's voice, quieter, raw. "There's nothing left to fix. It's all lies. You're clinging to a corpse. Don't be a fool," the other man snapped. "We can control the narrative. You're a Montgomery, whether your blood says so or not. Am I?" Charles said. "Or am I just the last mistake in a dying story?" Evelyn's pulse pounded in her ears. She recognized the second voice. It was Victor Harland, the Montgomery family attorney, a man who had served them for decades. She had met him once at a gala, all smiles and charm, the kind of man who carried secrets like currency. Daniel gestured for her to stay hidden, then crept closer to the doorway. Evelyn followed, silently. Inside the study, Charles stood near the fireplace, his coat still damp from the mist. The revolver was on the desk beside him. Victor Harland tall in his tilabzit. "Put the gun away," Victor said calmly. "You're not thinking clearly." Charles laughed, but it was a hollow sound. That's the first true thing you've said all night. Evelyn stepped forward. Charles, please. Both men turned. Evelyn. Her name left his lips like a question, like he wasn't sure she was real. Victor's eyes narrowed. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same, she said. I'm here to stop your madness. He snapped. You've dragged the Montgomery name through the mud for your own petty crusade, but it ends tonight. Daniel moved to stand beside her. The only thing that ends tonight is your family's lies. Victor sneered. Ah, A. Holloway. How poetic. He turned back to Charles. You see what's happening? They're trying to rewrite history. To take everything your ancestors built. Charles stared at the floor, silent. Evelyn took a step toward him. Charles, look at me. You don't owe this man anything. You don't owe the Montgomerys anything. You can start over. Victor lunged forward, grabbing the gun from the desk. No, he can't. He snarled. The movement was too fast. Evelyn screamed as the weapon went off once, twice the thunderous crack shaking the room. Daniel hit the ground, rolling to cover Evelyn with his body. Smoke filled the air, acrid and sharp. When it cleared, Victor was on his knees, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers. Charles stood frozen, Yewa, the revolver back in his hands, shaking. I didn't mean to, he stammered. Daniel pushed himself up, his arm bleeding where the bullet had grazed him. Give me the gun. Charles. Charles didn't move. His gaze shillen wheeled lost. It was supposed to stop, he whispered. I wanted it to stop. Evelyn reached out slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. Then let it. Charles, please, give it to me. He hesitated. Then, with trembling fingers, he handed her the gun. The house fell, silent except for Victor's labored breathing. Daniel tore a strip of fabric from his coat and pressed it against his wound. He'll live, he muttered. Barely, Evelyn turned to Charles. You need to come with us. We have to tell the police what happened. Charles shook his head, tears streaking his face. No, this house, this family, it's done. I won't leave it standing. Before she could stop him, he crossed to the fireplace and pulled a small canister from beneath the mantel. The label read *kerosene, *Charles. He began pouring it across the rug, the shelves, the desk, his movements frantic, desperate. It ends here, he said. The lies, the records, the ghosts, all of it. Daniel grabbed Evelyn's arm. We have to go, but Evelyn couldn't move. She watched him strike a match. The flame flickered in his shaking hand. For one terrible moment, the light reflected in his eyes burning, broken, almost peaceful. Then he dropped it. The room erupted in fire. Evelyn screamed his name as... The flames leapt up the drapes, devouring the old wood and portraits. Daniel pulled her backward, dragging her down the stairs as smoke poured through the corridors. Behind them, Charles's silhouette stood at the window, watching as the fire swallowed the manor whole. By the time they stumbled out into the cold night, the roof had already collapsed. The fog glowed orange with flame. Evelyn fell to her knees in the grass, choking on smoke and tears. Charles, she cried again, her voice breaking. But there was no answer. Only the roar of the fire, the crack of splintering beams, and the ghosts of a legacy burning itself to ash. Daniel knelt beside her, his hand trembling on her shoulder. He's gone, he whispered. Evelyn stared at the inferno, her face lit by the dying embers of the Montgomery Empire. And somewhere deep inside her, she realized that the truth she had fought so hard to uncover had finally consumed everything, leaving her nothing but the silence that follows after fire. Dawn broke over Greyhaven as a ghost weak light spilling across the coastline. The fog burned away to reveal what was left of the Montgomery Manor, a blackened skeleton of stone, a grave that still smoked. Firefighters moved like shadows through the ruin, their radios hissing, boots crunching through ash. The smell of burned cedar, old paint, and something worse clung to the air. Evelyn sat wrapped in a wool blanket on the back of an ambulance, staring at the wreckage. Her hair was matted with soot, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the cup of water someone had given her. She couldn't hear much, her ears still rang from the gunshots and the roar of the flames, but she didn't need to. She knew what the murmuring voices around her meant. They hadn't found Charles's body. Daniel stood a few feet away, arm bandaged, speaking with one of the fire marshals. He looked older now, his face drawn tight, his eyes flicking toward her every few seconds as if making sure she was still there. When he came over, his voice was quiet. They think he went down with it. The stairs were gone before anyone could reach the top floor. Evelyn nodded faintly, but her mind rejected it. Charles wouldn't let himself vanish that easily. Not without a word, not without something left behind. Did they find Victor? She asked. Daniel sighed. He's alive. Barely. They took him to the hospital in Portland. He'll face questions when he wakes up. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. He tried to keep the secret. Even after everything, that's what men like him do, Daniel said. They mistake silence for honor. Evelyn looked at him. And what do we do now? He hesitated. We tell the truth. The real one, this time. We let the world see what the Montgomerys built their empire on. The journal, the letters they survived, didn't they? Her eyes drifted back to the smoking ruins. I don't know. Maybe a firefighter approached then, his face streaked with ash. Mrs. Montgomery. She blinked at the name, but didn't correct him. The man held out a small object wrapped in cloth. We found this in what's left of the study. Thought you'd want to see it. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a half-melted brass locket, Margaret's locket. Somehow, impossibly, it had survived. The portrait inside was singed but visible. Margaret Holloway and the man who had changed everything. Edward Holloway. Evelyn's throat tightened. Thank you, she whispered. When the firefighter walked away, Daniel watched her turn the locket over in her hands. Maybe it's a sign, he said softly, that the truth endures. But Evelyn didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on the ashes where the manor had stood. A faint curl of smoke still rose from the spot where Charles had been. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw movement of shape in the haze, but when she blinked, it was gone. In the weeks that followed, Greyhaven became the center of a quiet storm. The newspapers called it the Montgomery, Fire reporting it as an unfortunate accident at a historic estate. Only local whispers told the fuller story à Weltier. His wife a stranger from the Holloway line and the secrets that burned with them. Evelyn stayed in town longer than she planned. She couldn't leave. Not yet. There were too many loose ends, too many questions that wouldn't die. The authorities had ruled the fire accidental, the official statement vague and unsatisfying. But one thing stood out. No trace of Charles's remains had been found. She spent her mornings at the small town library, combing through old records, trying to reconstruct the pieces she'd lost. Daniel joined her most days, his quiet presence grounding her. Together, they digitized Margaret's journal, transcribed the letters, and began writing the story neither of their families had ever wanted told. At night, Evelyn stayed in her small, rented room overlooking the harbour. Sleep rarely came. The fog would roll in again, thicker than before, pressing against the glass. Sometimes she thought she heard footsteps outside her door, soft, measured, familiar. But when she opened it, there was never anyone there. Then, one evening, a letter appeared under her door. No knock, no sound, just the faint scrape of paper against wood. Her heart raced as she picked it up. There was no more return address. Only her name on the envelope. Evelyn Montgomery. The handwriting stopped her cold. She tore it open. Evelyn, you were right about everything. The lies, the legacy, the blood that never belonged to me. I tried thinking, but something rooster dies a truth libby doves in earth. Maybe that's why it haunts me still. Don't look for me. I'm not the man you knew anymore. I never was. But if you ever wonder whether I found peace, know that I did, in knowing who I wasn't. Tell them the story. Eve, all of it. See, her hands trembled as she read it again and again, her eyes blurring with tears. The paper smelled faintly of smoke. Daniel found her like that a few minutes later, sitting on the floor, clutching the letter. When he saw her face, he knelt beside her. What is it? She handed it to him without speaking. Héréditons, then with a standing. He's alive. Evelyn nodded. Somewhere. Daniel set the letter down carefully. Then maybe that's enough. But for Evelyn, it wasn't, because beneath the pain, beneath the guilt and the ashes and the endless questions, something else had begun to stir a sense of unfinished purpose. Charles had told her to tell the story. Not just for the Holloways or the Montgomerys, but for everyone who lived their lives inside someone else's version of the truth. So she began to write. She wrote about Margaret and Edward, about the child buried beneath the chapel, about Charles and the fire that consumed the name he'd once worshipped. She wrote until her hands cramped and her eyes burned. And when she won, She's signed dit Averngalway. Asterisk. Months later, her book was published quietly, under a small, historical imprint. It didn't make headlines, but those who read it called it haunting, brave, unsettlingly true. It became a whisper in universities, in genealogical circles, in families that saw too much of themselves in its pages. Sometimes, Evelyn would receive letters readers claiming her story had freed them from secrets of their own. She would read them by the window of her small cottage in Maine, watching the sea. And every so often, among the ordinary mail, she would find an unmarked envelope containing nothing but a pressed white feather. No name, no note. The first time, she wept. The second time, she smiled. Because she finally understood what Charles had meant. Some truths never die. They simply take new names and wait to be told again. The years pass quietly, as they tend to when there are more ghosts in one's life than people. By the time the second winter arrived in Greyhaven after the fire, Evelyn had settled into a rhythm one that looked like peace from the outside but felt like penance from within. She'd bought a small house near the edge of town, close enough to hear the sea at night, like a memory. Every morning, she woke before dawn, brewed her tea, and wrote. Not just books now, but letters to the dead, to the living, to the past. She wrote to Margaret Holloway, Montgomery, asterisk I. Think I understand you now. You weren't trying to save your bloodline. You were trying to save your soul. Asterisk, she wrote to Daniel. Asterisk, I think we did the right thing. But right and good aren't always the same, are they? Asterisk, and sometimes, when the fog rolled in and the gulls cried like something ancient, she wrote to Charles. Asterisk, I hope you found somewhere the world doesn't know your name. Asterisk, Daniel still visited from time to time. He'd taken a job at a university in Boston, teaching history, specifically forgotten histories. He said her book had opened more doors than she realized. People are starting to question what they've been told, he'd said once over coffee. That's how real change begins. But for all his optimism, Evelyn could see the same exhaustion in his eyes that she felt in her bones. The truth might have been free, but it hadn't set them free. IT had merely changed the shape of their cage. Then, one night in early spring, a knock came at her door. It wasn't late enough to be strange, but something about it made her heart skip anyway. 3 slow knocks, spaced evenly apart, as if the person on the other side wanted her to feel each one. She opened the door to find a boy standing there, no older than 17. He wore a mail carrier's jacket several sizes too big and clutched a small, weathered package. Mrs. Holloway? He asked, his voice uncertain. Yes, this was left at the post office. No, return address. They said you'd want it delivered tonight. She took it from him, thanked him, and watched him disappear down the path before locking the door. The package was light to light and wrapped in brown paper, sealed with wax. Her stomach turned as she saw the seal, the Montgomery crest. Her fingers trembled as she broke it. Inside was a small wooden box, the kind used for keepsakes. When she lifted the lid, something metallic glinted inside. A silver pocket watch, its surface engraved with initials she knew by heart. Asterisk, asterisk, CM, asterisk, asterisk, her breath caught. The watch was old Charles's grandfather's, the same one he used to wind at night before bed. She hadn't seen it since the fire. There was a folded note beneath it. She opened it carefully, afraid the paper might crumble in her hands. Asterisk, Evelyn, asterisk, asterisk, time doesn't forgive us. It only waits for us to understand what we did with it. Asterisk, asterisk, you were right, truth doesn't die. It hides, it watches. Sometimes, it waits for someone else to finish what it started. Asterisk, asterisk, come to Greyhaven Chapel at midnight. Asterisk, asterisk, see asterisk, the handwriting was his, older, shakier, but her pulse quickened. For a long moment, she just sat there, staring at the words. The sound of the clock ticking louder and louder until it felt like the whole room was beating with it. Charles, she whispered. At 11:30, she left the house. The night was cold and moonless, the fog thick as smoke. The drive to the chapel felt endless, the same winding road she had taken once before, when everything had still been burning. Now it was silent, swallowed by vines and darkness. She parked near the old graveyard and got out, flashlight in hand. The chapel stood exactly as she remembered it, crumbling, hollow, its roof half caved in. But something new gleamed faintly through the cracks of the door. Light, candlelight. Her breath hitched as she stepped inside. Dozens of candles burned across the altar, flickering against the walls, their flames mirrored in shards of broken glass. The air smelled of wax and salt. And there at the front, where the old stone slab had once been moved, stood a man. He was thinner than she remembered. His hair, once dark, was shot through with grey. A beard covered his jaw. But the eyes, those were still Charles's eyes. "Evelyn," he said softly. She didn't move. "You're alive." He smiled faintly. "You sound disappointed. I buried you," she whispered. "I watched that house burn." He nodded. "You did, but I wasn't ready to die." "Not yet." She took a hesitant step closer. "Why now? Why come back?" "Because you finished the story," he said. "But you didn't finish the truth." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" He motioned toward the slab. It was still open, but what lay inside was not what she expected. The remains were gone. In their place was a small chest, the same chest Margaret's journal had come from, but now it was sealed, the wood polished, the lock new. "I went back," Charles said quietly, "after the fire. I found what was left, the baby's bones, Margaret's locket, the last pieces of what our families destroyed." "Why?" "Because we owe them peace." Evelyn stared at him. "Peace? After everything?" He stepped closer, the candlelight trembling across his face. "Don't you see? The Holloways and the Montgomerys were never enemies. They were one family, torn apart by pride and fear. You exposed the lie. I burned the name. Now we bury both." He placed a small golden key in her palm. "This is yours. You started it. You should be the one to finish it." Her throat tightened. "Charles," he smiled faintly, "it's all right. I'm not here for forgiveness. I just wanted to see you once more, to know you still believed in what you fought for." She didn't trust herself to speak. She knelt beside the key. Enchanted, the opened. Inside was a single folded piece of parchment, Margaret's handwriting, faded but legible. Asterisk. "To whoever finds this, asterisk asterisk, may you learn, what we could not, that blood is never truth, and truth is never owned. It only chooses those brave enough to bear it." Asterisk. Evelyn looked up, tears welling in her eyes. But Charles was gone. The candles still burned, but the chapel was empty. She stepped outside, calling his name into the fog, but there was no answer, only the sound of the sea, endless and patient. She stood there for a long time, the key still warm in her hand, before she whispered into the wind, "Goodbye." Then she locked the chapel door behind her, for the first and final time, and left Greyhaven forever. Years later, when Evelyn's second book was published, a memoir titled Asterisk, What the Sea Keeps Asterisk, the dedication read simply, Asterisk. For CM, who burned the name so the truth could live. Asterisk. And on quiet nights, when the tide was low and the wind right. Locals said you could still see a figure, walking the cliffs above Greyhaven, a man in an old coat, silver watch in hand, always turning it, always waiting. Some said it was a ghost. Others said it was love that never learned how to rest. In the end, the sea did what time never could. It washed away the borders between memory and myth. By the third decade after the fire, Greyhaven had changed. The manor was gone, its ruins overtaken by wild ivy and seabirds. The chapel was sealed, the graves overgrown, the story of the Montgomerys reduced to a whispered curiosity for tourists who wandered the coastline on stormy days. And Evelyn, Holloway once Evelyn, Montgomery had long since left the world of public eyes. Her second book had become something of a legend. Asterisk. What the Sea Keeps Asterisk was taught in literature classes, quoted in essays about truth and lineage and the inheritance of guilt. But Evelyn herself had disappeared into the kind of quiet only the tired earn. Until one autumn morning, decades later, when a young woman named Clara Holloway, her granddaughter, arrived in Greyhaven. She came with nothing but a worn leather journal and a letter sealed with wax. The journal had belonged to Evelyn. The letter had not. She found it among her grandmother's things after her death, a note addressed simply, asterisk, to whoever seeks the end of the beginning. Asterisk. The handwriting was elegant, precise, and faintly familiar to anyone who had ever read the story of the Montgomerys. It was Margaret's, Clara had grown up hearing fragments of the family, history half true, half legend. Her grandmother had spoken of Charles, never confirming the fire, only saying that some they just fadment had made them. But Clara had always been curious. There was something in her that craved the weight of the past, the same hunger that had driven Evelyn once. Now she stood before the old chapel, its walls cracked but still standing. The lock Evelyn had placed on the door was rusted, fragile. She touched it gently before turning the handle. It opened. Inside, the air was cold, stale with the scent of dust and time. The candles that had once burned here were long, melted to nubs, and the floor was littered with fallen leaves that had slipped through the broken roof. She moved toward the altar, the same place where, long ago, Evelyn and Charles had unearthed their shared curse. There, resting on the stone slab, was a box. Newer than its surroundings, yet old enough to belong. A brass plaque gleamed faintly in the dim light. Asterisk for those who bear the Holloway name and those who once bore Montgomery's. Asterisk. Clara hesitated before opening it. Inside was a collection of objects, each a fragment of the story she'd only known through words. The half-melted locket. The golden key. A silver pocket watch, its glass cracked but still ticking. And beneath them, a letter sealed with the crest Evelyn had sworn she'd never use again. Clara broke the seal with trembling hands. The letter was written in Evelyn's familiar, looping hand steady, even in age. Asterisk, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and Greyhaven has called you the way it called me. Asterisk, asterisk, you will find that history has no end, it simply changes the voice that tells it. I once thought the truth was a blade meant to cut away lies. I was wrong. Truth is an inheritance, one that demands care, not conquest. Asterisk, asterisk, Charles and I spent our lives trying to bury what our ancestors began, but some stories are too heavy to be buried. They rise like the tide. Asterisk, asterisk, so I leave you this, his watch, her locket, my key. Que pitemsef kim honest. And if the sea ever whispers a name you don't know, listen, it may be one of ours. Asterisk, the final line was signed simply, asterisk Evelyn Holloway Montgomery. Asterisk Clara stood there for a long time, the letter trembling in her hands. Through a broken window, she could see the sea grey and endless, its waves crashing against the rocks below the cliffs. And as the wind slipped through the chapel, she heard it, a faint sound, like a man's voice carried on the tide. Not a word, just a name, Evelyn, her breath caught. She turned toward the door, but there was no one there. Only the vast patience and, for a long while, she listened, wondering if she'd imagined it. Then she smiled a small, knowing smile that belonged to all the Holloways before her. Some stories, she whispered, don't end. They wait. She closed the box, placed it back on the slab, and locked it again with the golden key. Then she stepped outside, letting the sea wind pull her hair back as gulls circled overhead. Behind her, the chapel's door creaked once and fell, still. The waves crashed below. And for an instant, just as the sun broke through the clouds, Clara thought she saw two figures standing at the edge of the cliffs, a man in a long coat, a woman beside him, hand in hand, watching the water. But when she let, they were gone. Only the sea remained, and it kept their secrets, as it always had. Clara left the chapel and followed the worn trail toward the cliffs. The sea wind whipped through her hair, carrying the sharp scent of salt and something ancient, something alive. Below her, the waves struck the rocks with a rhythm that felt deliberate, like a heartbeat. She paused where the land met the edge. The place where her grandmother had once stood, where Charles had vanished into fire and legend. She opened her hand. The silver pocket watch glinted in the morning light, its cracked face frozen between seconds. Inside the lid, faint but legible, was an inscription. Asterisk, what we inherit is not our blood, but our choices. Asterisk, Clara closed her eyes. The sound of the sea grew louder, and for a moment she could almost feel them, all their presence threading through time like a pulse that refused to fade. Margaret, hiding her love beneath the chapel. Evelyn, unearthing what should have stayed buried. Charles, burning his name to cleanse what no truth could purify, and now her, the last Holloway, the last Montgomery. The bridge between both. She took the watch, the locket, and the golden key and placed them on the grass. Then, with a breath that carried every story that had ever been told, she let them fall into the waves below. They disappeared instantly, swallowed by the grey. For the first time in generations, there was silence, no ghosts, no echoes, no questions left unanswered. Clara stayed until the tide began to rise. As the water reached the base of the cliffs, the sun finally broke through the clouds, painting the sea in gold. The wind softened, and somewhere deep within it, she thought she heard laughter, not mournful, not ghostly, but light, free. She smiled. The past, she realized, didn't vanish when it was forgiven. It simply changed shape, becoming part of the air, the water, the names carried forward. When she turned away, the chapel stood quiet behind her, its doors sealed, its secrets finally at rest. And far out on the horizon, where the light met the sea, two faint figures seemed to walk side by side, one in a long coat, the other with wine-tossed hair, their hands brushing but never parting. The tide rolled in, whispering the same truth it always had. Asterisk blood fades, truth remains. Asterisk then the sea took the words for itself, and Greyhaven after more than a century was finally still. Legend. She opened her hand. The silver pocket watch glinted in the morning light, its cracked face frozen between seconds. Inside the lid, faint but legible, was an inscription. Asterisk, what we inherit is not our blood, but our choices. Asterisk, Clara closed her eyes. The sound of the sea grew louder, and for a moment she could almost feel them, all their presence threading through time like a pulse that refused to fade. Margaret, hiding her love beneath the chapel. Evelyn, unearthing what should have stayed buried. Charles, burning his name to cleanse what no truth could purify. And now, her, the last Holloway, the last Montgomery. The bridge between both. She took the watch, the locket, and the golden key and placed them on the grass. Then, with a breath that carried every story that had ever been told, she let them fall into the waves below. They disappeared instantly, swallowed by the grey. For the first time in generations, there was silence, no ghosts, no echoes, no questions left unanswered. Clara stayed until the tide began to rise. As the water reached the base of the cliffs, the sun finally broke through the clouds, painting the sea in gold. The wind softened, and somewhere deep within it, she thought she heard laughter, not mournful, not ghostly, but light, free. She smiled. The past, she realized, didn't vanish when it was forgiven. It simply changed shape, becoming part of the air, the water, the names carried forward. When she turned away, the chapel stood quiet behind her, its doors sealed, its secrets finally at rest. And far out on the horizon, where the light met the sea, two faint figures seemed to walk side by side, one in a long coat, the other with wine-tossed hair, their hands brushing but never parting. The tide rolled in, whispering the same truth it always had. Asterisk, blood fades. Truth remains. Asterisk then the sea took the words for itself, and Greyhaven after more than a century was finally still.